A hand grabbed her hard by the neck and shoved her forward. She stumbled. Her knees hit wood. The crowd blurred into a wall of hats, dust, and shouting men. Behind her, a chain rattled. Beside her, a boy was pushed onto the same platform, maybe 9 years old, gripping her sleeve so tight his knuckles had gone white. The auctioneer slammed his hand on the block and called out a starting price. Bidders raised their hands. The boy started to cry. And right then, the woman they would later call Hannah Doyle did something nobody in that room had ever seen. She turned to the auctioneer. She dropped to her knees in front of the whole crowd. And she screamed 4 words that stopped a cowboy at the back of the room cold. What 4 words could make a hard man forget how to breathe? Stay with me on this one. The town was called Briar Bend, a scratch of buildings on the east edge of nowhere. Cattle country, mining country, the kind of place where men outnumbered women 6 to 1, and a hard winter could empty a household down to a dirt floor. Once a year, the town held what it called a placement auction. The polite word for it: people who couldn't pay their debts, widows who couldn't keep their farms, children whose parents had died in the fever last spring. They were lined up in the town square and bid on by anyone who would feed them in exchange for work. That's how Hannah Doyle ended up on the platform. Her father had owed money to the bank. He died still owing it. The bank had taken the farm and everything on it. Hannah had nothing but the dress on her back and her younger brother, Tobias, holding her hand. He was 9 years old. Skinny, bright, quiet since the funeral. He hadn't said 5 words in a week. The auction system in Briar Bend had one rule that broke families. Brothers and sisters were sold separately. Adults to one buyer, children to another. Because nobody wanted the burden of a small mouth they couldn't put to work. Hannah knew this. She'd known it the moment they were marched into the square that morning. She'd held Tobias against her hip and tried to keep her face calm so he wouldn't see what she saw. The bidders were what you'd expect. A widow named Mrs. Jeller with arms like rope and eyes that didn't blink. A rancher named Holloway, big-bellied, sweating through his vest, looking at Hannah the way a man looks at a piece of furniture he's already decided to take home. 2 or 3 farmers in dusty hats who needed a back, not a person. A man from the county office in a black coat, there to claim any child no one bought. He had a list and a pencil. He didn't look up when boys were called. Tobias knew about that man. Hannah had seen him stiffen when the man walked past. The auctioneer was named Pell. He had the voice of a man who'd done this for 20 years and stopped feeling it on year 3. He banged his block. He called names. He moved them along. Now here's the thing about that morning. Something was off in the square that nobody could quite name. The crowd was bigger than usual. The bidders were more aggressive. There was a smell of trouble in the air, the kind of smell that gathers when good people decide to look the other way and bad people decide it's their day. At the back of the square, leaning against a hitching post with his hat tipped low, stood a man none of the locals knew. He was tall, lean in the shoulders, heavy in the hands. Trail dust on his boots. A bedroll still tied to his saddle on a horse hitched 10 yards behind him. He'd ridden into Briar Bend that morning for flour and coffee. He'd come around the corner and seen the platform and the chain and the line of people waiting to be sold off. He hadn't moved since. He didn't bid. He didn't speak to anyone. He stood there and watched, and once in a while his jaw would tighten and his hand would shift on the brim of his hat, and then he would go still again. His name was Caleb Reeves. 38 years old. Widower. Owned a piece of land 12 miles south of Briar Bend that he'd been trying to make pay for 6 years. He'd lost a wife and a daughter to cholera 6 years back, and he hadn't taken a meal at his own table without thinking about it since. He had not come to Briar Bend to buy a person. He had come for flour and coffee. But he was a man who'd seen enough to know what evil looks like when it dresses up as commerce. And what was happening in the square that morning was making his palms cold. The auctioneer banged his block. Hannah's name was called. Pell shouted out the price. Holloway raised his hand, and Hannah felt Tobias's grip tighten until it hurt. Hannah looked down at her brother. She squeezed his hand twice. It was their old signal. When their mother was alive, 2 squeezes meant I'm right here. Tobias squeezed back once. She wasn't sure he had a second one in him. She lifted her chin and looked at the bidders. Holloway raised his hand higher. Pell called the next number. Mrs. Jeller shifted her weight. The man from the county office turned a page in his book. Hannah understood then what was about to happen. They were going to sell her to Holloway, and the boy was going to be marked unsold. The man with the pencil would walk him out of the square. She would not see him again. Pell banged his block again. He called out $15. Holloway raised his hand. 20, said Mrs. Jeller. 25, said Holloway. Mrs. Jeller's mouth tightened. 25 was past what she could pay for a hand. She lowered her arm. Going once, said Pell. 30, said Holloway, just to make sure. That's all it took. There was no other bid. Pell brought the block down. Hannah was sold for $30. Holloway grinned and stepped toward the platform. Pell looked at the boy. Tobias Doyle, he called. 9 years old. Healthy. $5. Nobody raised a hand. Hannah's chest stopped working for a second. $3, Pell said quieter. Nobody raised a hand. Pell waited. The crowd shifted. A few people coughed. Holloway was already at the steps of the platform, reaching for Hannah's wrist. The man from the county office closed his pencil into his book and stepped forward. That was when Hannah broke. She dropped to her knees on the platform. Her dress caught under her shins and tore. She grabbed the front of Holloway's vest with both hands, and she did not scream like a frightened woman. She screamed like a person who had run out of every other word in the language. Take him. Take him, not me. Please, anyone, take him. I'll go anywhere. I'll work for nothing. I'll sleep on a floor. I don't need a bed. Just take him. Please, please take him. He won't survive there. Please. The square went quiet. This is where it turned. In a square full of men shouting numbers and women looking at the dirt, in a town where nobody wanted to hear another woman cry, a sentence had been spoken that nobody had been able to ignore. Holloway tried to laugh. He looked around for someone to laugh with him. Nobody laughed. The man from the county office looked at his book, and then up and then back at his book. Pell did not bring his block down. Tobias was crying without sound, mouth open, fists in his eyes. At the back of the square, Caleb Reeves had not moved during any of it. He had stood at his hitching post and watched and let it happen. And then he had heard her cry. He felt it go through him, in a way he had not felt anything go through him in 6 years. He pushed off the post and walked. People turned to watch him because he wasn't from around there, and his boots made noise on the boards. He walked through the bidders. He walked past Holloway, who was 3 steps up onto the platform. He walked to Pell. How much for both of them, he said. Pell blinked. 30 for the woman, Pell said. 3 for the boy. Caleb reached into his coat and counted out $33 in silver and bills and put it on the auction block. They're mine, he said. Holloway turned the color of an old brick. Now hold on, Holloway said. I bid on her. She's mine. I had the high bid. You had the high bid, Caleb said. You didn't pay. He hadn't dropped the block. Pell looked at the money on his table. He looked at Holloway. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the woman on her knees with her brother's hand crushing hers. Pell brought his block down. Sold, Pell said. Both. To the gentleman. Holloway said something that nobody printed in the paper that week. He turned and shoved his way back through the crowd, calling for his men. Caleb climbed the 3 steps onto the platform. He took off his coat. He didn't look at Hannah's face. He laid the coat over her shoulders so the crowd would stop looking at her torn dress. He held out his hand to Tobias. Tobias took it. Come on, Caleb said. We're going home. He walked them down the steps. He walked them through the square. He walked them past every person who had stood there and watched and been able to do nothing about it. He put Hannah and Tobias up on the wagon seat. He climbed up beside them. He took the reins. And then they were riding out of Briar Bend, and the auction was still going on behind them like nothing had happened, and Hannah did not cry until they were a half-mile gone. When she did, she cried with her face pressed into the top of her brother's head. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. He drove 12 miles south. The sun moved across the sky. Tobias fell asleep against Hannah's side. Hannah stopped crying and just breathed. Caleb's place came into view past a low ridge. A small house. A barn that had seen weather. A corral with 2 horses in it. A windmill turning slow. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. This is it, he said. Not much. But it's quiet. He helped Hannah down. He carried Tobias inside in his arms. Tobias did not wake up. Caleb laid him on a bed in a side room and pulled a blanket over him. Hannah stood in the front room and looked at the table and the stove and the row of pegs by the door and the boots lined up under them. Her hands were shaking and she could not make them stop. Sit down, Caleb said. I'll make coffee. He did. He made coffee. He set a cup in front of her. He sat across from her. You'll have your own room, he said. The boy too. Soon as I clear the back room. Tonight you take mine and I'll sleep in the barn. You don't have to. I do, he said. And nobody owes me anything. You hear me? Not a thing. I bought a piece of paper, not a person. The paper goes in the stove tomorrow. Hannah nodded because she could not speak. The kettle hissed. Outside, the wind moved through the corral. For the first time since her father had died, Hannah Doyle felt the muscles in her shoulders start to come down. She thought just for a moment that the worst was over. She was wrong. She woke up at first light to the sound of horses. Not one. A deputy from Briar Bend, named Riley with a tin badge on his vest that he had not bothered to polish in some time. Holloway smiled at Caleb the way a man smiles when he has already decided what's going to happen. Mr. Reeves, Holloway said, I believe you took something of mine yesterday. I took nothing of yours, Caleb said. I had the high bid. Pell hadn't called it. Pell will say what I tell him to say, Holloway said. Which is what brings me out here. We're going to settle this in town. Tomorrow morning. Marshal's office. You'll bring the woman. No. Holloway's smile thinned a little. I'm not asking Mr. Reeves. The marshal is. I've already spoken to him. He says the auction was conducted improper. He says the woman has to be returned and rebid. And I will be the highest bidder when she is. Caleb did not answer for a long moment. You can have your rebid, he said. I'll be there. The woman stays with me. That's for the marshal to decide. That's for the woman to decide. In the way they'd come. Caleb stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Then he leaned the rifle against the rail and put his hands flat on the wood and breathed. This was the moment Hannah understood that what had happened in the square had not ended in the square. She came out onto the porch. I'll go back, she said. Caleb did not turn. You will not. He'll burn this place. He'll have his men do it. I've seen men like him. He won't stop. I know what he'll do. Then I'll meet him in town tomorrow, Caleb said. And the boy will not go back to the county. And you will not go back to him. Those are two things I am sure of. The rest we'll figure out. Hannah stood at the porch rail beside him. The sun was just clearing the ridge. The corral horses were moving slow in the morning cold. Why, she said. Why are you doing this? He thought about that for a while. Because yesterday in the square, he said, you were the only person who said anything that sounded like a person. Everybody else was buying or selling or looking at the dirt. And you got down on your knees in front of 100 men, and you tried to give your place away to a boy who couldn't bid for himself. I haven't heard a sound like that in 6 years. And I wasn't going to walk away from it. Hannah did not say anything. She put her hand on the porch rail next to his. Now if you're still with me on this one, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. There's more of this story coming, and I want you here for all of it. The day went strange after that. Around mid-morning, a wagon came up the lane. It was an old neighbor of Caleb's named Sutter, a thin man with white hair under his hat. He pulled up and didn't get down. Reeves, Sutter said. I came to tell you what I'm hearing in town. Tell me. Holloway's been at the saloon since dawn. He's telling everyone you stole a woman off the auction block. Says you assaulted him on the platform. Says you grabbed a child out of his hands. None of that happened. I know none of that happened, Reeves. I'm telling you what he's saying. And he's saying it to people who already don't know you. There's talk of riding out here tonight. Caleb nodded slow. Talk by who? Half-drunks. Holloway's men. Some others who ought to know better. But they don't. And they're listening. Sutter looked past Caleb at Hannah on the porch. He took his hat off. Ma'am, he said. I don't know you. I'm sorry for what you've been through. I'll say what I can in town. Thank you, Hannah said. Sutter put his hat back on. He looked at Caleb. Whatever you do tomorrow, do it loud, Sutter said. Don't sneak. Don't hide. Walk in the front door. People in Briar Bend will follow whatever they see in front of their eyes. Give them something to see. He turned his wagon and left. Caleb went back inside. He sat at the table for a long time. Hannah made him eat. Tobias sat between them, quiet, eating slow. He hadn't said a word since the square. That night Caleb sat on the porch with the rifle. Hannah didn't sleep. She heard the horses around 2 in the morning. 3 of them moving slow. They didn't come up the lane. They came around the back, through the brush. She heard Caleb stand up. She heard the rifle cock. A minute later she heard a flare of fire, a small one, and the sound of men running. Caleb was already off the porch. She found him by the barn. There was a pile of straw on fire under the wall. He was kicking it apart and stamping the sparks. The fire had not caught the wood. He had reached it in time. When the fire was out, he stood there breathing hard. His boots were black. There was a half-burned matchstick in the dirt by his foot. He picked it up and put it in his pocket. He came back to the porch. He sat down in the same chair. He set the rifle across his knees. He said one thing to Hannah, who was watching him from the door. "Go back to bed." She did not go back to bed. She got a chair and sat next to him. They watched the road until the sun came up. They rode into Briar Bend at noon. Hannah was beside him on the wagon seat. Tobias was between them. She had told Caleb she wasn't staying behind. She had said it the way a person says a thing they've decided forever. He hadn't argued. He drove the wagon down Main Street at a walk, in the middle of the road, because Sutter had told him to. People came out of the storefronts. People stopped on the boardwalks. People watched. He pulled up in front of the marshal's office. He set the brake. He climbed down. He helped Hannah down. He lifted Tobias down. He took the receipt out of his coat pocket, the paper Pell had given him for $33, and he held it in his hand. He walked into the marshal's office. The marshal was a man named Beard, 50, gray, Caleb laid the receipt on the desk. "That's the receipt for $33 I paid Pell yesterday in front of 100 witnesses for the lawful purchase of Cowboy was at the steps. He hadn't completed his bid. "You damn old," Holloway started. He hadn't completed his bid, Pell said again, louder. "I called sold. I'm tired, Holloway. I've been calling that block for 20 years, and you came at me last night with all sorts of talk, and I went home and I thought about it. The block dropped. He paid. That's the law of the auction. I will not stand here and lie about it for you." Beard sat back in his chair. Now this is the part Hannah did not expect. Caleb did not speak next. He turned and looked at the door. He looked at Hannah standing there in the doorway with Tobias in front of her and her hand on his shoulder. "Come in," he said. "Tell him what happened." Hannah came in. She stood in the middle of the floor. She did not look at Holloway. She looked at the marshal. "My name is Hannah Doyle," she said. "My father died owing the bank. The bank took the farm. The town put me and my brother on the platform yesterday for placement. Mr. Holloway bid $30 on me. Nobody bid on my brother. The county man was about to claim him. I knew what that meant. I've heard what happens to 9-year-old boys in the county home. I would not let it happen to him. I dropped to my knees on that platform, and I begged anyone in the square to take him in my place. Mr. Reeves heard me. Mr. Reeves bought both of us. He brought us home. He gave us beds. He said the paper would go in the stove, and we did not owe him a thing. Last night, 3 men came onto his property and tried to set his barn on fire. I will not name them because I did not see their faces. But I will say that an hour earlier, 4 men had come up the lane and threatened him in his own yard. One of them is standing against that wall. The room did not move. Beard looked at Holloway. That's so sigh. Holloway's face went through 3 colors. He pushed off the wall. That woman is a liar. She is mine and I will. He moved. Fast. 3 steps across the office, his hand going for Hannah's arm. Caleb got there first. Caleb did not punch him. Caleb did not draw his sidearm. Caleb stepped between Hannah and Holloway, and he caught Holloway's wrist in his hand, and he held it. Just held it. Holloway tried to twist away. He could not twist away. Caleb's hand did not move. You will not touch her, Caleb said. Quiet. Holloway tried to pull. Nothing. In this room, Caleb said. In this town, on any road I am ever on. You will not touch her. You will not look at her. You hear me, Cyrus? Holloway made a sound. Caleb let him go. Holloway stumbled backward into the wall. Beard stood up. Beard said, I was inclined to hear your side. I was inclined to be fair. I am not inclined anymore. Riley, take him outside. Hold him there. We are going to have a conversation about a barn fire. Riley stared at Holloway. Riley looked at Beard. Riley looked at Holloway. Riley took Holloway by the elbow. The crowd outside parted as they came out. Caleb turned to Beard. My family is going home. Beard nodded once. They are. Caleb walked Hannah and Tobias out of the office. The crowd was waiting. The crowd was not silent. Somebody said her name. Somebody else said his. A woman near the front held out a loaf of bread to Tobias, and Tobias took it because he was 9 and he was hungry. Caleb put his hand on Hannah's back. He walked her to the wagon. He lifted Tobias up. He helped her up. He climbed up beside them. He drove them home through a town that was, for the first time that week, watching the right thing happen. The first month was quiet. Caleb cleared the back room. He moved his things to the barn. He told Hannah and Tobias the house was theirs, and he would knock before coming in the front door. He knocked the first morning. He knocked the second. By the end of the week, Hannah had taken the door off the latch, and he stopped knocking. Tobias started speaking again on the 9th day. It was at supper. Caleb had set down a plate of beans and bread. Tobias had eaten half of it, and then he looked up at Caleb and he said, Where do the chickens sleep? Caleb put down his coffee. In the coop, Caleb said. Out back. I'll show you tomorrow. Tobias nodded. He went back to his bread. Hannah cried into her sleeve, and Caleb pretended not to see. By the 2nd month, Tobias was running. He had filled out. There was color in his face. He followed Caleb everywhere, to the barn, to the corral, to the well. Caleb taught him how to lead a horse. Caleb taught him how to stack wood. Caleb whittled him a small wooden horse out of pine and put it in his pocket without saying anything about it. Tobias kept that horse in his fist for a week. By the 3rd month, Hannah was running the house. She had taken inventory of every cupboard. She had patched every shirt. She had killed a snake by the chicken coop with a hoe, calmly, without screaming. Caleb heard her tell Tobias afterward that snakes were just one of the things you handled, and you didn't have to scream at things to handle them. Caleb stood in the barn door listening to that, and decided something he had been deciding for 3 months. Holloway was gone from Briar Bend by the end of the 2nd month. Sutter brought the news. The marshal had pressed the barn fire investigation. 2 of Holloway's men had told the truth. Holloway had not been able to stay. He had sold the saloon to a man from Cheyenne and left town on the morning stage. Nobody knew where he had gone. Nobody asked. The county home man was reassigned that summer. A new placement system was put in. Brothers and sisters were not to be sold separately. The auction block was moved out of the town square. Sutter said in the saloon one night that one woman had changed it by getting on her knees. Caleb heard about this from Sutter the next time Sutter came by. Caleb did not repeat it to Hannah. But she found out. She found out the way people find things out in small towns. She came home that afternoon and sat on the porch beside Caleb and said, "They told me what happened in the council. Yes, because of me. Because of you." She looked at her hands. "I didn't do it for that." "I know you didn't," he said. That's why it worked. By the end of the 4th month, the porch was where they ate supper most nights. Tobias had a wooden horse and a real horse. The corral had 3 horses now. The barn was patched and painted. The chickens had multiplied. One evening late in October, Caleb came in from the corral and washed his hands at the basin and dried them on the towel on the peg, and he turned around and he said to Hannah, who was at the stove, "I'd like to ask you something." "Ask me." He looked at her. He looked at the stove. He looked at her again. "I'd like to ask if you'd marry me. Not because of anything that happened in town. Not because of any paper. Not because the boy needs a name. The boy has a name. I'd like to ask because in 4 months I have not had a meal at this table without thinking that I am the lucky one. And I would like to keep eating at this table." Hannah set down the spoon. She came around the stove. She stood in front of him. "Tobias," he said. Tobias looked up. "Your sister and I are going to be married," Caleb said. "If that's all right with you." Tobias thought about this for a while. He was a boy who thought about things. "Will you still teach me the chickens?" he said. "Yes." "And the horses?" "Yes." "Then it's all right with me." Caleb nodded. He put his hand on the back of the boy's neck. Not heavy. Just there. The first time a hand had touched the back of someone's neck in this story, it had been a stranger's hand on Hannah's neck, shoving her toward a platform. This was a different hand. This was a different neck. This was a different reason. This was the meaning, finally, of the action that had started everything. The sun was going down over the ridge. The horses were quiet in the corral. Hannah came out onto the porch with 3 plates of supper. She sat down. He sat down. Tobias sat between them. And in a country full of trouble and bad men and crooked auctions, on a small ranch 12 miles south of a town that had almost done a worse thing than it knew, 3 people who had nothing to do with each other ate their supper together as a family. Because one of them, on her knees, had asked for someone else to be saved first. And because one of them, at the back of the room, had heard her. Believe me, there's no story like this one.